Alright, we finally have the confirmation that Laxus will be coming into the game tomorrow in limited banner, which is very exciting. I know lots of you guys are very hyped about this unit. So am I. I will be doing a summoning video. Probably I will do a summoning video tomorrow. But ahead of that, let's take a look at his kit to see whether he's actually truly living up to his expectations. Well, our expectations of him. So if we actually just take a look at his skills one by one, then move on to his passive. His skill 1 is pretty simple. It just does pure damage, but it does have one very cool thing that it charges forward in order to do the attack. So what happens is that you can see here he moved forward in order to attack, so kind of closing on the gap. Now the distance he moved is about same as the dash. So for example, if I stand here, in between kind of this two circular pattern, if I move forward, I can hit the enemy. If I stand in the same space and I use a dash and then do a normal attack, you can see I can also hit the enemy. So the distance it creates is pretty much the same as a dash. So most of the time, what you want to do is you want to start off with this, closing on the gap, and then you can do the attacks. And this is very important because his normal attack is short range, so you definitely need to be close to the enemies. But that's kind of why this is helpful. But also because it has the same distance as dash, I guess if for whatever reason you need to escape from an enemy, I guess you can also use this dash to quickly, make up some spaces or run away, etc. Now let's move on to his skill 2, which I think is a bit tricky to use because it actually have different mechanics depending on your positioning. So if you just take a look at the description, basically what it says is that it's going to hit enemies in a straight line in front, inflicting a stun, and you create a powerful knockback that ignores super armor. Now, super armor is only one type of a control immunity, so obviously when you're doing this, if the enemy has super armor, then you can ignore it and still stun the enemy, or move the enemy. However, if you are using a different kind of control immunity, for example, like for himself, he has something called invincibility, which is immune to all damage and control. I believe this then wouldn't be ignored by his skill 2. So this is something that you have to be mindful of, is that this would only be ignoring the super armors, but not other type of control immunity. Now, let's take a look at the other thing, which is the powerful knockback, which as it sounds, it should be knocking back the enemy. However, the funny thing I found out about this is that the knockback is actually relative to the distance between you and the enemy already. So what I mean is that if you're already very far from the enemy, so let's say here, if I use this, what you can see here is that I attack the enemy, but the enemy hardly move at all. In fact, I don't think they move at all. I don't think they move at all from this kind of distance, right? However, if I get very close to them, and then attack, what you can see is that I'm actually able to push them back and create the same amount of distance. And if I only stand, let's say, halfway between the distance I was showing earlier, then it will only push back the enemy a tiny bit. So basically what this is end up happening is that the distance that will be created between you and the enemy when you're using skill 2 is always going to be the same. So if you're actually close, it will push, but if you're far, the enemy wouldn't move at all. So this is basically what makes this skill a bit tricky to use, because you really want to well, actually it's not tricky to use, but basically how you want to use it is really going to depend on the situation, and maybe you can be a bit strategic about it. Because for example, if you actually want to let's say the enemy at the start of the battle, enemy is running towards you, what you want to do is then I was hitting those ones instead, but okay, fine. If the enemy is really close to you, what happens is that, sorry, start off at the beginning. If at the start of the battle, enemies are charging towards you, what you can do is you can use this, which basically doesn't move the enemy at all. However, because the enemy are still moving towards you, so yes, they will be stunned for like 0.6 seconds, but afterwards they will still be running towards you. That basically gives you a bit of buffer for you to use other skills, which are also long range, which is very nice. And by the time all of your skills finish, the enemy will be keep charging towards you, and then you can end up using their normal attack, which is very nice. So that, it can potentially be a good idea to use skill 2 at the start of battle if you want to use it this way, just a range attack but not knocking back. But let's say the other way around, let's say you are actually doing normal attack and your HP is low or your cooldown is almost finished and you really want to use a skill, but it's not quite ready yet, or you want to switch to a different character, then what you can use skill 2 instead in this scenario to actually push back the enemy, creating that distance between you for you to then run away. So basically the skill 2 is actually quite versatile depending on how you use it and the distance you are from the enemy. So do bear that in mind, and I think it could be one of the key ways of how you actually play Laxus to his maximum potential. Now, skill 3 is a different skill. If you just look at his description, it doesn't say much other than pure damage, but it does actually push back the enemy as well. So for example, if you see here, it's able to push back the enemy. The nice thing about this is that it's able to push back the enemy even when you're standing far. So if I was hitting at this range on skill 2, the enemy will hardly move. However, at this range on skill 3, the enemy will be pushed back. And this would work, push back, regardless whether you're close or far from the enemy. So this is basically very different from skill 2 in terms of distance it's able to create. So do have that in mind as well when you're using Laxus. Under different circumstances, you may choose to use skill 2 or skill 3, and maybe if you just want to push back distance, you want to use skill 3 straight away and save skill 2 for later other situations when you don't actually need that distance to be created. So that's basically, once again, another quirk you have to be aware of when you're using Laxus. And then finally, you have his skill 4. Now this skill 4, basically what it does is that it do a bit of crowd control, get all of the enemy together, and then do an attack. However, if you take a look at what the skill description says, is first of all, he has invincibility for 2.5 seconds, which is very nice. That's always a very nice thing to have. The damage scaling is really high as well, so it's very strong. Skillful ultimate. It says it's a very large range and pulls the enemy within front to the focus of this attack so that you're able to hit all of them. So that immediately makes you think like if the enemies are all charging towards me, I can do this kind of crowd control, get everyone together and then hit them all together, which is nice on paper. However, from practice, when I was testing this, I don't think the pulling mechanism is very strong. So for example, if I'm in this distance, so the enemy is a bit further away from me. If I do this, what you can see is that the enemy at the back are not being pulled at all. Or if I stand kind of in the middle, what you can see is that yes, the enemy kind of close to you are being pulled, but the range itself is not actually that high. Like the pulling range is not very high, but some of the enemy only get pulled at the very end, and that's because they are running towards me when I was using this skill. So if I just used my skill at the very start of the battle, they wouldn't actually have been pulled towards me. But let me try to do it here, right? Here, okay, you can see all of those enemies are here. If I do this, okay, it's a bit hard to see. But if I do this, so you can see the enemy at the back doesn't actually get pulled to the very last minute, and that's because they were moving towards me. So that almost tells you, even though this is able to do a bit of crowd control and pull the enemy, the pulling power is not very strong. So I think what I'm trying to say here is the damage range is high. It says a large range, but the large range is more for the damage we'll be doing. But the actual pulling itself is not actually very strong pull. So I do feel like you can potentially escape from that because it doesn't feel like it's really hindering the movement much. And I'm making this conclusion by comparing to Midnight, who has a crazy, insane skill 4, which if I just take a look at this, it just says um, this one, it says it will do attract nearby enemy to it and then detonate within a small range. So like if you just look by the description, it sounds like it actually a smaller range than Laxus. But in reality, if you actually take a look at this, if I use skill 4, just take a look at this pulling, the speed this is pulling, compared to what Laxus do. It's totally different. So do not just mistakenly think Laxus is going to have the same effect as some of the other pulling characters are able to do. Like for example, whenever you are facing up against Midnight in PvP, it's actually very, very difficult to dodge his skill 4 because he just like forcefully grab you and just very hard for you to move away from that. Lux's skill 4, even though it says it pulls, I feel like it's actually going to be quite easy to dodge that. So I don't think it's going to be too much problem in PvP if you do have to face up against Laxus and to dodge his attack. But that's only when you actually control the character, obviously. If it's in peak contest where AI controls both sides, then I'm sure his skillful will still do very well. But in the normal PvP, when you actually have the character, you can actually control the character, it should be quite easy to actually dodge Lux's attack. But having said that, I think it's quite easy to dodge pretty much most of the character's attack. I think Midnight is one of the few exceptions where it's actually very difficult to dodge an attack. But most other characters you should be able to dodge their attacks anyway. But yeah, so that's another interesting I found out about Laxus. And then if we take a look at his passive, his first one have reduced damage taken. It's for 1.8 seconds and it's an 18% damage reduction, which is okay. 1.8 seconds is not too long, but the nice thing is that 2 attacks both trigger this, and the attacks he have, this one for example, his skill 1, it's only 10-second cooldown, and this one 16-second cooldown. So the cooldown is actually relatively short. So basically what that means is that you should actually be able to activate this quite a lot, especially if you actually play at the right tempo. So don't use your skills back to back for Laxus. You actually want to leave a bit of a gap of timing when you are using the skill in order to maximize the timing of how long you can get the damage reduction. So for example, if I take this, right? I mean, 1.8 seconds is going to be very hard for you to measure. So I'm just going to say, let's say you wait for 2 or 3 seconds. I start off with this 10-second cooldown. I wait, I then basically get a 2-second damage reduction. On the third second, I use skill 3. I get another 2-second damage reduction. At that point, I'm probably like 7 or 8 seconds into my first skill 1's cooldown already. So 2 more seconds where I do not benefit from any damage reduction, then I can activate this and then benefit from damage reduction again. So even though 1.8 on its own doesn't sound very long. The fact that all his attacks have pretty short cooldown really helps that to help you to always maintain like a constant damage reduction, which is very much needed because if you actually take a look at his stats, his defense is only 88. I mean, this is at like level 1. His defense stat is only 88. And put this in perspective, Ikaruga, who's like a known glass cannon, have 96. But Ikaruga is bulkier than Laxus, which is crazy because Ikaruga is probably one of the most fragile glass cannon in this game. So Laxus is definitely going to be a glass cannon if you do not have his damage reduction. And even with his damage reduction, yes, he can take a few more hits, but that probably only makes him, Ikaruga's level or something like that. But yeah, this is very important for you to make sure your Laxus actually stay long enough in the battle because he's definitely very, very fragile. Then if we take a look at leader skill, enhanced attack speed, very nice leader skill, probably one of the best leader skill in the game. First of all, it's 15%, and I think it can go up even higher as you level up. Increased attacking speed basically works in 2 ways, right? First of all, you have increased damage because obviously you can do more attack in the same span of time and therefore doing more damage in total. So this 15% attack speed increase is almost same as like 15% flat increase in damage, which is absolutely amazing. And this is for your whole team. So that's how good it is. But on top of that, one thing attack speed is better than just pure flat damage reduction is the fact that if you actually have any attacks that benefit from your attacks, from your normal attacks, then basically the more times you hit, basically means you are getting more additional benefit as well. So one classic example is going to be for himself. He has this thing where when his basic attack skill hits the enemy, he's able to gain something called Thunder Power, which is very nice. And obviously, because he already have an increased attack, he's then able to stack this up very quickly. And remember, this applies to all of your allies, so you can also pair Laxus with someone like, let's say, Heavensward Urza, who also, when you maxed out, have the ability to stack something with his normal basic attack. So this is all of the things that you kind of want to look out for when you want to build a team around Laxus, is to build him with characters that will also benefit from like doing more normal attacks. So it's not just going to be extra damage, but you also get some bonus effect on top of the fact that you are doing so much normal attack. So that's one way of how you may want to construct a team around Laxus. Okay, now let's move on to it's a nano passive. I mean, this one you're only going to get it when you're 6-star character, so you may not be able to have it straight away. But for the sake of evaluation, let's take a look at it anyway. The first one, when he is Lightning Dragon Roar, so his skill 3, he will get super armor. So this is going to be immune to all control, pull, and knockback effect. So that's quite nice. It's always good to have a bit of a control immunity. Even though ironically, this is one that Laxus can actually bypass. But it's good to have that against other characters. Then for the second one, he's gonna gain Thunder Power whenever he's basic attack or skills, and when he then use skill 4, you are gonna consume 5 stacks of them in order to increase your crit hit and crit damage for 8 seconds. Now once again, because he have increased attacking speed, so even though this is 8 seconds, what you should really be doing is you should be buffing up that by another 15% because he will be attacking more frequently in the same time span. So once again, Laxus is also very good in a team when you are doing lots of buff or debuff because he allows your whole team to do more during that short span when the buff or the debuff is valid for. So that's kind of why Laxus is almost like a universal character from that perspective. But yeah, so this is nice buff. The only downside, I guess, is because his skill 4 is 24-second cooldown. So even though he is going to be very easy to be able to actually stack up his Thunder power because he already attacked very fast from his leader skill, you won't actually be able to get this buff until you actually use this, and then there's a 24-second cooldown. So you would not be able to do like a back-to-back Sounder Maniac buff, even though he would be building up his exclusive sigil much faster than 8 seconds. But unfortunately, you won't be able to benefit from this throughout the whole battle. And then lastly, his last passive is going to be increasing the damage of his skill 4 by 50%. I already showed you earlier, his skill 4 has very, very high damage scaling. So that another 50% on top of that is just crazy. Possibly one of the hardest hitting skill in this game. So that's very nice. And also, it extended duration of his invincibility by another 2.5 seconds. So that's going to be like almost 4 seconds total, which once again, also very important because I already talked about his glass cannon, like even more fragile than Ikaruga. So having that damage immunity means a lot more to him than a damage immunity on a tank or on supporter unit kind of thing. So it's very good for him to have extended damage immunity time frame. So yeah, so that's gonna be all of his kit. Now, so how good is actually Laxus? Should we pull on him? I would say definitely pull on him. At least one copy, even if you do not plan to use him. Just purely the fact that you have this leadership skill, which enhances attacking speed. I think he's the only character who have this kind of ability right now. This is going to be very useful and also very universal, not just for characters which may already be in the game right now, for example, Heaven's Will Urza, but potentially other future characters who will benefit from attacking more frequently with base attack. So I think you definitely want this just in your pocket for whenever those scenarios or those characters are needed, because he will be very good as a utility support character, even if you're not using him for damage. Now, in terms of actual how good he is, in terms of his actual skills, etc., I personally think he's good, but not the best. Mainly because I feel like it could be a bit hard to actually use him. Because I already mentioned, for example, there are two problems I can see with using Laxus. One is the fact that he kind of he's such a glass cannon that you really want to time the tempo of his skills. So you really want to maximize when he has his damage immunity, for 4 seconds, and when he has his damage reduction for 2 seconds. You definitely do not want them to overlap. You actually want them to spread out. And remember, you get this 2 second damage reduction when you use two different skills. So I do feel like there is going to be a bit of like skill required with Laxus. You can't just play him where you just spam all of his skills one by one. It doesn't really work like that. I think you have to be a bit more mindful when you actually play him so that you actually can take advantage of the various different damage, immunity, and reductions throughout this entire battle to make sure he actually lasts much longer on the field. So I think that's one potential quirk I found about Luxus. The other quirk I'm not a great fan of is that he has two skills that requires pushback. Oh, and once again, his skill 2, remember, that distance, that pushback is gonna be different depending on whether you're close to the enemy or further away from the enemy. So once again, there's a bit of a skill required to actually play Luxus. You need to be mindful of kind of the environment around you. But the main thing I don't really like about his pushback ability is the fact that he's actually a slow, close range attacker. So if you do actually push back over the enemies, and then you end up having to run towards them to do normal attack, then it's like almost like what's the point of actually pushing back the enemy in the first place, right? It's different to like let's say Midnight or Jalal. When you push back the enemy, you can still attack from distance, and therefore when the enemy is running towards you, they're taking chip damage. But that's not the case for Luxus. Like you are pushing the enemies away, but you're not really taking advantage of that benefit unless you switch to a different character. But if you're just using Laxus on himself, he's not actually taking advantage of that. So maybe what you actually want to do, once again, is a bit of like a timing required. You have to be very careful when you actually use those skills. Maybe you only want to push back the enemy when you have other skills available so that you kind of link up your long range attack or your pushback attacks with another long range attack rather than trying to link up a long range attack followed by short range base attack where you don't actually waste time running towards the enemy. So once again, I think you have to be pretty careful about the order when you play the skills. And it's not even the same as Heaven's Will Urza, where you actually need like a particular combo to release the skills in order. Laxus is more kind of just more like you need more awareness of the battlefield, so you know when to make the most use out of those kind of like distance manipulations through either his pushback or he close up the distance with his like skill one. And also on this note, I will just show you why I feel like this can potentially be a pain for people who just like spamming attacks. Because if I actually switch him to bot mode, you can see he start off with skill 4, draw enemy out, push them back, and then waste time running towards the enemy to you want to use this dash and normal attack. So you can already see like if you just end up spamming attacks back to back with Laxus, he's not really being used most optimally. So if you do really want to play Laxus a lot, I think you do have to have that kind of like global awareness of the environment around you and just knowing when to use which attack. So I think that can potentially make him a bit tricky to have. But if you are able to master all of that, I do think he's a very, very good character to have. And like I said, you should definitely get at least one copy just so that you have this leader skill in your back pocket for whatever scenario when you need to um, make your basic attack much quicker to inflict some additional benefit or stack up some buff quicker or debuff quicker.